everyone, and thank you for joining the Storage Bid Cost Recovery and Default Energy Bid meeting for this initiative, which focuses on alternative proposals and proposed solutions. I'm Brenda Marquez, representing ISO Stakeholder Affairs Group, and I'll be providing support for this meeting. On the next slide, you will have that this meeting is attended for collaborative, and we encourage you to ask questions and share your perspectives on the topics. Yolanda, if you could go to the second slide, please. Please feel free to raise your hand after the end of each topic. Also, we have Yolanda, who is our event producer, who will be also assisting me. On the next slide, if you're unconnected through audio only, you will be selecting *3 on your phone device. And if you're connected with us through WebEx, you'll use the raise hand icon below on your bottom of your screen. If you do have any questions, feel free to send them over to myself or all panelists, and we'll be able to see those questions while we're in this meeting. Also, most of this information and presentation has been posted on the website for this initiative. I have went ahead and sent that link out to everyone, so you can click on that. Also, for the next slide, if you can go ahead, Yolanda. We want to make sure that everyone knows that this call is being recorded for informational and community purposes only. Any related transcription should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. For today's agenda, we will cover the background, stakeholder feedback, and schedule update that will be led by Sergio Dueñas-Melendez. He's our storage sector manager at the ISO. Sergio will also go with the alternative solutions proposed by stakeholders, as well as he'll be reviewing issues regarding mitigation. Within these three topics, I invite stakeholders to wait at the end of each topic, so that way Sergio can cover all his material, and that way we can take those hands within the end of each of those topics, just to keep the conversation going, and we're able to make sure that we answer each question that are being asked. And then about 3:35, we will be opening up stakeholder discussion. And so we invite stakeholders to make sure to state your full name and affiliation within all verbal and chat questions. If you do forget, I'll make sure to remind you, but please provide your full name and affiliation for us who are in this call. At the next slide, if you can, Yolanda, we will cover a little bit of the high level of the policy initiative stakeholder process. As you can see, we are currently have hosted a few documents with the straw proposal issue paper, and so we're moving along, but at this time, Sergio will be covering the scheduling in the next slide, so he'll kind of detail exactly within the proposal development phase where we're at. But I can say is that we have posted this presentation, and we also plan to have that commenting template approved this afternoon, so you can also provide feedback. And that will be due on the 26th, on next Monday. But I'll make sure I cover that again on the next steps at the end of this presentation. And then on the next slide, if you can, Yolanda, I'll go ahead and turn it to Sergio Dueñas-Melendez, who will go over the background, stakeholder feedback, and schedule updates for this discussion. And thank you so much. Go ahead, Sergio.
Thank you, Brenda. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the call for today. As you can tell, we'll be discussing different solutions that have been put forth by stakeholders, and we'll be discussing some of the updates regarding mitigation that we have been preparing following the prior calls. Before that, I wanted to, make sure that we're all in the same page with the background of the initiative, and then talk a little bit about the feedback we've received and how we have modified the schedule for this initiative to reflect that feedback. So this first two slides serve a little bit as background and a refresher on the effort and why we're here. As you all are aware, the ISO has identified that storage resources have received disproportionate VCR payments relative to their energy schedules. Our analysis of the current VCR provisions reflects that this is due to the fact that the VCR construct does not adequately consider the state of charge of storage resources, which is critical for these resources to support their awards and schedules in real time. Because of this fact, current rules have resulted in materially different treatment between conventional generators and storage resources. This creates two concerns that we're seeking to alleviate with this initiative. The first concern is that storage assets are not exposed to real-time prices for deviating from their day-ahead schedules. This basically means that these resources do not face significant risks from deviating from these schedules, given the fact that the VCR construct will make them whole. The second concern, which we have spent a bit more time discussing in prior calls, has to do with the fact that storage resources may have an incentive to bid strategically to maximize the combined BCR and market payment. Because of the fact that these resources are not exposed to real-time prices and that they might not face the full risk or consequence of deviating from their schedules, they can also bid in a manner that would allow them to get a BCR payment that, combined with the market payment, is higher than what they would have received by simply, supporting their awards or schedules. So this concern, is quite material, and these two concerns are quite material. And here at the ISO, we have been actively tracking storage bid cost recovery payments since we started communicating all of these issues and examples with stakeholders, so as to ensure that the payments are not, continuing to grow at the detriment of the rest of market participants. So, as we noted in our issue paper and straw proposal, the ISO has, in that paper, included a proposed solution that would mitigate the two concerns identified. The proposed solution would essentially redefine dispatch unavailable due to state of charge constraints in the binding interval of the real-time market as non-optimal energy, which would make it ineligible for VCR. So if a given storage resources state of charge at the start of the binding interval of the real-time market is equal to its minimum or maximum value, meaning that it's full or empty, then the market would insert a re-rate or derate to zero to capture that asset is completely full or empty and thus unavailable. As a result, that proposed solution would materially limit the chances of unwarranted VCR, but not fully eliminate VCR, right? So all of this is background, and I want to underscore that I will continue to refer throughout the conversation today, I'll continue to refer to this idea as the proposed solution, so that it's a viable shorthand for this idea, and we don't need to fully repeat what it entails. I also want to underscore, as you'll see in coming slides, that now this is not the only solution on the table. So while I will refer to it as the proposed solution, there are other solutions that have been brought and put forth by stakeholders. So what's some of the feedback that we've seen to date? So to date, some stakeholders have recognized and support the ISO's efforts to expeditiously resolve these market design issues related to storage VCR. The Department of Market Monitoring, in their comments on the initiative, noted that the current VCR paradigm for storage creates different concerns enlisted here, and that the ISO's proposed solution would address all of these concerns by fixing the core issue from DMM's perspective. That is, the incentive for batteries to bid in a manner that tends to result in their capacity being discharged prior to the peak net load hours. In their comments, DMM also noted that addressing all of the issues or concerns as proposed in track 1 is a better approach than having an interim change that would only address the strategic bidding concerns or gaming concerns as they included in their comments, and then tackling other issues later on. DMM was not alone in their comments. Other stakeholders also recognized and supported these efforts along with the proposed solution. The CPUC's Public Advocate's Office expressed support to our solution, describing it as measured and sufficiently well targeted, noting that the challenges today from the VCR construct merit expedited resolution of the issue. Similarly, SCE also generally supported the timing and scope of the initiative and partially supported the proposed solution, asking for more examples on how it would apply to resources that can only partially support their awards and schedules. Importantly, I think, and generally aligned with the concerns and goals we've stated prior, SCE noted that as a principle to guide this conversation, we should think that if a resource does not perform, it should not receive VCR, since those payments would harm market efficiency, which generally is aligned with the conversations we've been having in this initiative, as well as, for example, the conversation that we had in the context of the Market Surveillance Committee meeting. Now, for other stakeholders have put forth comments that mainly touch upon the need for more time to holistically revise the VCR construct and identify instances where VCR may be warranted. Feedback from stakeholders like CalCCA, CISA, PG&E, CES, SDG&E, and Vistra, and WPTF included several recommendations regarding the timing and the schedule of the initiative. These stakeholders in their comments underscored that the current timeline for the initiative is too accelerated and that it does not offer sufficient opportunity to develop a holistic revision of VCR or to fully discuss different alternatives that may warrant consideration. I'm trying to put all of these different comments in a similar light, as they all refer to the expedited nature of this initiative as something that complicates open and robust discussion of the issue and potential solutions for it. But all of these have, different details and different perspectives, right? Some of them argue for slowing down a little bit and finding an interim solution, and then having a longer process that more completely revises VCR. Others argue just for the latter, basically no interim solution, but focus on more complete consideration of the VCR construct as a whole. And others also, focus on the proposed solution, noting that while it might not be perfect as of now, if we spent more time, we would reach a point where we'd have a robust and cohesive proposal to move forward. So the common denominator here is really more time to better understand the issue and to more fully develop a robust solution is necessary. So based on the verbal and written feedback that we've had from stakeholders in this initiative, both in the calls we've already had prior and in the written comments that you all have submitted, we have decided to update the schedule for this initiative to allow for more robust discussion of the proposed solution that was put forth and also alternative solutions that have been put forth by stakeholders. This revised schedule will allow for more time for feedback, so No longer will we have the couple of days or 3 days turnaround for comments, and it will target a November joint board of governors and governing body meeting. This is a change that we think will support stakeholders' abilities to collaborate with us, to put forth their ideas, and to work with us to develop those ideas so that we can continue comparing them to other proposals and determining, what is the best path forward given the challenges that we're trying to solve. I want to note that this revised schedule does not, change the importance and the sense of urgency that we have in addressing this issue. We definitely want to move quickly in addressing this issue, but we want to do so with stakeholders and their ideas on board and giving them an actual good faith opportunity to be developed and to understand how they would interact with the issue at hand and other market constructs. In the meantime, we will continue to very actively monitor storage VCR payments, and we will also, be very mindful of if there's any activity or any, type of participation that seems to be representative or referential to the examples that we put forth in front of all of you. We'll identify that and we'll act quickly to minimize the chances of that happening. So yes, we'll have more time to develop this. We'll look at different proposals, but we will keep a very vigilant eye on what is happening on VCR. So I'll go quickly over the prior schedule and our new schedule so that folks can have an idea of what has changed. So this was the prior track 1 timeline, which had been included in prior postings. As you can see, we would have had, a revised straw proposal posted already, and this would have been the meeting on the revised straw proposal. Then there would have been a very tight 4-day turnaround for comments and a week for the final proposal to be posted, and then 6 days for comments for that. Essentially meaning that today's meeting would have basically been the final meeting in that timeline. This is the updated timeline. Today's meeting will focus on alternative proposals that have been put forth by different stakeholders. We'll have comments on those proposals and on this meeting due next Monday. So this, which would be the shorter of the remaining commenting periods, is still longer than comment periods were before. We'll have a revised straw proposal posted early September, then a meeting a week later, and then comments on that a couple weeks later. So there will be ample time for stakeholders to absorb the new materials and provide, hopefully, detailed and thoughtful comments on it. Then we'll have a draft final proposal to be published by the end of September, a meeting on it early October, and another set of comments a couple weeks later in October, again, to allow for robust participation and feedback. And finally, we'll move to the joint board of governors and governing body meeting in early November. I'll pause here for a moment to make sure that, everyone can take a look at this, and this will be reflected in the initiative's website as well. And just as Brenda noted before, we'll have the template for comments posted later this afternoon so that everyone can, get started on those at your convenience, and that we can move forward with this updated timeline. So that's the gist of this part of the presentation. I'll stop here to see if there's any questions. I see one hand raised.
Let's go to Callie Wells.
Hi, it's Callie Wells with WPTF. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Hi. Well, first of all, really appreciate you guys being responsive to stakeholders and, giving us a little bit more breathing room between papers, meetings, and when comments are due. I guess I have just a clarifying question. So is this the timeline that CAISO is planning on following for kind of the more holistic review of VCR that stakeholders have been asking for? Or is this more just for maybe an interim solution to kind of address the more urgent issue with storage VCR? Because one thing that we included in our comments, I think last meeting you asked for, stakeholders to provide a timeline of what they would like to see is, based on our previous experience, whenever you kind of put out an artificial deadline, especially on an initiative that is looking for more of a holistic review, it never tends to, it still always is a rush, and it's almost like this artificial deadline impedes the policy process. So I'm trying to understand if this timeline is the holistic review, and if it is, I would urge you guys to maybe consider, doing a track one or an interim solution, and then taking the time to really dive into the BCR issue for storage.
Yeah, I would say that kind of depends on what ends up being adopted here in this timeline. There are, from our point of view, some solutions that have been put forth that could serve as that longer-term fix, others that might just serve as an interim fix. So that will depend greatly on what we kind of come to a conclusion on should be applied by November. If what we get to is more so suited for just an interim solution, then there will be more discussion of a more robust BCR reassessment, let's say. But that is dependent on the proposal that emerges from here as well.
Okay, I appreciate that. So you guys are still open to making maybe an interim solution, and then, one of the more holistic review items might be what the MSC suggested, and looking how BCR is done for exceptional dispatch for storage resources. So I was hoping to have the time in the stakeholder process to consider options like those for the more holistic review. So appreciate the clarification, and I'm glad to hear that you guys are still open to having that more longer timeline.
If needed, yes. Okay, I don't see other hands raised. Maybe I'll give folks 30 seconds, 10 seconds. 30 might be too long. Okay, then I'll keep going to the next section. And this next section basically touches upon some of the solutions that were put forth by stakeholders. The inclusion of ideas here is not meant to, say that these are the ones that we might consider. As you'll see in the comments template that will be posted later today, if you have other alternative solutions to propose, please put them forth. These are the ones that we identified in comments as sort of, brought up by more than one stakeholder, or that have been brought up in conversation prior, and that also are a little bit more, that have been put forth in a more developed stage. There might be other ideas, so this is not to explicitly limit the universe of ideas to be discussed. But if you have others, this meeting and the comments will be kind of like the prime opportunity for you guys to let us know if you have other solutions that you think should be considered. And just as I said before, the proposed solution, what we have talked about before, we are still, considering that as well. This is all meant to give the opportunity for us to robustly discuss all of these ideas and record that in the ongoing future instances of the paper, make sure that there's a record of that, and continue development of this potential tools and enhancements. So just to remind everyone of what I just said, the proposed solution that we had discussed already is really focusing on reclassifying energy. It's focusing on reclassifying energy that is associated to an interval in which the storage resource was unable to support its awards or schedules because of state of charge constraints. So the proposed solution is not modifying how BCR is calculated. It's not modifying the bids or prices or elements that are taken into account in the BCR calculation. It is only further refining what energy is included into the BCR calculation. So as such, the proposed solution we've talked about before is really not a change to the BCR formula or construct itself. It's more so a change to how energy is classified so that it can be counted or not towards BCR. So I want to underscore that because the solutions we'll talk about in this section are materially different, right? They're looking at different solutions. So in the comments, some stakeholders suggested that it would be valuable to implement an alternative solution in the interim that would be focused on the concerns related to strategic bidding, what in the introduction of this call we refer to as concern 2, that storage assets may have an incentive to bid strategically so as to maximize their combined BCR and market payments. So the California Energy Storage Alliance, CISA, they suggested this proposal, this alternative solution to be applied in the interim, in the near term, to address the concerns related to strategic bidding. The solution would modify the formula that is used to calculate the BCR. So today, the formula is here in the first bullet. We're looking at the difference between real-time dispatch and the day-ahead schedule times the difference between the real-time bid and the real-time LMP. The part that could be used to, strategically get a higher or to maximize BCR payments is this factor, the real-time bid. As such, CISA proposes to change that factor so that now it's the day-ahead LMP minus the real-time LMP. This solution is not, let's say, this is not the only flavor of this solution. Other stakeholders like Vistra suggested something pretty similar, but that would use the asset default energy bid instead of the day-ahead LMP. But overall, the logic behind both of them, from my perspective, is quite similar. The logic is that we would thus eliminate the ability of an asset to bid in a manner that maximizes the BCR payment. So stakeholders have argued for this solution for a couple of reasons. First, because it would eliminate the impact of that resources bid on BCR payments. So that way, it's no longer something that they can strategically use. Other stakeholders also noted that a solution like this would be useful because the software that they currently use for bidding automatically uses minus $150 bids in the hours with day ahead schedules to quote unquote firm those bids or those schedules up, right? Basically, they might use a form of bidding to ensure that they will meet those schedules. And that form of bidding, as we've described prior, could lead to excess or to disproportionate BCR. Therefore, a solution that basically eliminates the impact of the real-time bid would be palatable for them, since they don't really need to change how they're using some of their software to firm up their day-ahead schedules and their bids in real time. Stakeholders that have proposed this acknowledge that this solution would not resolve concern one. Concern one referring to the insulation of storage assets to real-time conditions and real-time prices. But they argue that this would allow for more time to develop a more holistic solution that can address concern one appropriately. So, what are some of the advantages and drawbacks of this solution? So a clear advantage is that it would eliminate the impact of a resources bid on BCR payments. Basically, all of the conversations we've had in prior meetings related to bidding in a manner that would unduly inflate or maximize the BCR payments for an asset, those concerns would be largely mitigated. The drawbacks, as I mentioned before, is that this proposal would continue the current insulation of storage resources from real-time prices. It wouldn't necessarily change bidding behavior in a manner that reflects real-time conditions, thus ensuring that resources are available in the hours of the greater need. So, that issue of concern one would remain. The proposal would also not eliminate buy and sell back BCR. It would only limit its magnitude. And it's important to note that, because part of the challenge or concern that we've identified in this situation is that the current VCR paradigm effectively treats storage quite differently from other dispatchable assets. So the fact that this would only limit the magnitude of that issue but not eliminate it is something that we want to underscore as a potential drawback of the solution. And finally, this formula, it will continue to pay VCR to resources that are not available in real time. Now, the difference, the payment will be different, right? Now it will be the difference between day ahead and real time. But it doesn't eliminate the potential of a situation where assets that are just fully unavailable continue to get bid cost recovery that, is basically paid for by other market participants and the rest of the market. Another thing to note here that is not necessarily a drawback, but I want to underscore, is that this formula, and I'll go back to show it, this formula effectively eliminates, the bid component from the formula, right? So it does change the nature of this mechanism. It is not necessarily a bid cost recovery now, but it would be more of an arbitrage mechanism between the day ahead and real-time prices. This is important to think a little bit about, mainly because, it changes the nature of and the apparent goal of the formula. Something that is important since, for example, the proposed solution retains the nature of bid cost recovery as a bid cost recovery mechanism. It only makes it so that in certain conditions, there is no bid cost recovery. But here, the nature of it would change. So we prepared some examples comparing the status quo, the proposed solution, and CISA's proposal to illustrate to folks how they would compare with regards to what is paid to market participants. So in these examples, let me give a quick guide as to how to read the example. So the bottom line is not the bottom line, but the second to last line, which is the real-time BCR payment, and is the settlements code here is cited as well, CC 6620. So as we go through this and the other example in this format, focus on that second to last line. The second thing to note is here we are using the settlement sign convention. For all of you that review your settlements, you're familiar with it. But as a reminder, negative values indicate a payment from the ISO to the market participant. Positive values would indicate the opposite in that second to last line. So when you see a negative value in that second to last line, that means that that is being paid to a resource. And finally, both this and the other example that we'll go through in this format have a couple of green cells. Those were for our internal development of the examples. They don't have really a meaning here that we're trying to convey or anything like that. So focus really on the second to last line. In this example, we're looking at a case that we believe it's, generally what CISA had in mind. There is a day-ahead schedule where a resource has cleared, and when we get to, oops, sorry, my apologies, I don't know how that happened. Okay, we're back. Sorry about that. So we're looking at an example where there is a day-ahead schedule for 10 megawatts here, and in real time, the resource cannot support that day-ahead schedule, and actually it ends up not discharging, but charging. So basically, this is decremental energy, right? You're doing less than your schedule. In the status quo, this scenario would result in buyback of a bit over $5,000. Under the proposed solution that we have discussed prior, this would result in $0 of buyback. And that is because in this scenario, we are assuming that the state of charge constraint is binding. Under the CISA proposal, we're doing the same as in the status quo, but the only difference is that we've modified that formula not to look at the difference between the real-time bid and the real-time LMP, but to look at the difference between the day-ahead LMP and the real-time LMP. So this would result in a buyback that is less than half of the status quo, around $2,140. Now, we've decided to start the conversation with this example because it illustrates kind of the key differences between the status quo, the proposed solution, and CISA's proposal in terms of the magnitude or how it would resolve the issue at hand, right? CISA's proposal here, it would definitely reduce the magnitude of the VCR payment, but the VCR payment is still present. We also wanted to start with this one because this is probably more, I don't want to say the most common case, but between this one and the other example, this is probably likelier that we have the ahead LMPs that are less than the real-time LMP, and that we have decremental energy. However, as we'll see in a couple of slides, there are other scenarios where this proposal could result in higher higher VCR relative to the status quo. I will pause, before I move forward, I'll pause here to see if anyone from the ISO team wants to add anything about this example. Particularly, Amelia, if there's anything you'd like to add, it's okay if not, just let me know.
I'll just add very quickly for everybody on the phone. I know it's a lot of numbers in a table to look at. I'd highlight the schedules. If you look at the day-ahead schedule on the top, this is a resource that's dispatched to discharge 10 megawatts in the day-ahead market. What we're showing a few rows down in the FMM schedule is that in the 15-minute market, this resource is instead scheduled to charge at -10. And then in the 5-minute market, the RTD, it's then scheduled to charge a little bit less at -9. So we've worked through all the settlement from there. The implication in this example, although it's not explicitly stated, is that there is a binding state of charge constraint for whatever reason, that is forcing this resource to be charging rather than discharging at this period. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that, Amelia. And because of that implication of the state of charge constraint, really that's why in this scenario, the proposed solution results in 0 real-time VCR, right? Because since there's an SOC constraint, that energy would be, the energy associated with this scenario would be ineligible for VCR. So thanks for that note. Okay, so moving forward, we want, as I mentioned before, we want to discuss these alternative proposals here and to continue developing them so as to, better understand and better be able to assess which ones, could help us address the concerns we've identified. And because of that, we'll go over some of the, let's say, questions that are still out there on how we could implement this, right? So CISA's proposal would use the day-ahead LMP instead of the real-time bid in the calculation of VCR. There are still questions as to how we could implement this for storage assets that are part of the WEIM and are outside of the ISO's footprint. So there is no day-ahead LMP for WEIM storage assets. This concern is really focused on assets in those territories, because if there were in an EDAM BAA, then they would have a day-ahead LMP. For resources that are in WEIM outside of the ISO's footprint, we could use the day-ahead P-node LMP, but it's important to note that this price is relative to the ISO's BAA. So it's not really reflective of the offers and conditions in which those WEIM assets are. Now, this could also be, let's say, circumvented in a way by using the DEV. The problem is that storage resources in those WEIM areas may not have a DEV. Actually, they can't use the storage DEV. So because of that, that is not necessarily a viable solution. So there are still some questions as to, how would we apply this for those entities, for resources in WEIM and not EDAM. Another important question about this proposal is whether the proposed modification to the formula would apply in all intervals or only in the intervals where the state of charge constraints are binding. From my reading of the comments from stakeholders, the latter was more so their intent. However, it would be important to have some consistency, if we are to use it across all intervals, if we are to use it only in the intervals where state of charge constraints are binding, then that leaves the other intervals to still be vulnerable to strategic bidding. Therefore, it is likely that it would be preferred to apply this across all intervals, but just for storage resources. If that is the case, then it is unclear how to treat incremental real-time dispatch relative to the day-ahead schedule. So as we mentioned in the example that we just went through, that is looking at decremental dispatch, right? There's less energy relative to the day-ahead schedule. But what about incremental dispatch? Should BCR credit for revenues that are dispatched above their day-ahead schedule relative to the day-ahead LMP? If so, then that might reduce the incentive to offer high in the afternoon so as to make sure that you will be available in the net peak hours. So this is still, an open question, and would like to have some discussion on it in this forum. Final set of questions have to do with how to deal with instances where the day-ahead LMP is greater than the real-time LMP, and there is incremental dispatch in real time, meaning that real-time megawatts are greater than day-ahead megawatts. While this scenario might not materialize often, it definitely underscores that there might be a need for additional logic. Right now, the proposal would just change one variable, one factor of the formula, but we might need to think about the solution to focus only on instances of decremental dispatch relative to the day-ahead schedule. That way, if the day-ahead LMP is greater than the real-time LMP, we could use the day-ahead LMP to calculate the real-time bid cost. But if there is an instance of incremental dispatch, then the BCR should likely be set to 0 still. And I'll show an example as to how this would look like. So here we have the same, a very similar setup to the prior example, right? The day-ahead schedule is 10. Here, however, the resource is scheduled in the 15-minute market to 15 megawatts, and in the 5-minute market in RTD also to 15 megawatts. Under the status quo, this would result in a real-time BCR payment of $250. In our proposed solution, again, assuming that there is a state of charge constraint that is binding, and that's why we're moving in this direction, this would result in $0 of BCR. But under CISA's proposal, as stated, this would result in double the BCR that in the status quo, because it's crediting that incremental dispatch at the difference of the LMPs. So here, we're effectively paying more BCR for an asset that was also able to dispatch at a higher megawatts more and at a higher price in real time. So this is important to underscore that it is likely that we might want to continue working on this proposal to effectively focus exclusively on instances of decremental energy or decremental dispatch. Okay, we've gone through a lot of material here, and there's a couple of things on the chat. I believe there's a couple of questions. Okay, so one of the questions is, and I'll go back to this example. Can you explain what the FMM RTD IIE is in that example? And here, I believe you referred to the two lines just above day-ahead settlement. So here, these are really the difference between the FMM IIE is the difference between the day ahead schedule and the FMM schedule. The difference, the RTD IIE would be the difference between the FMM schedule and the RTD schedule. So hopefully that addresses that question from the chat, and I don't see others at this time.
For everybody on the phone, IIE is instructed imbalance energy.
We do have a question back from that same question. I think her name is Adora from SCE. Let's go ahead and unmute her.
Hi, yes, Adora from SCE. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Sorry. In this example that you have here, can you explain what's driving the BCR? If the FMM and real-time schedules are greater than the day-ahead schedule, how is this an example of the buyback or sellback issue we're trying to address?
Yeah, well, I think here what we're trying to show is an asset that we're assuming that there is a state of charge constraint, so as to be able to compare all of these. The key driver in the status quo difference is the difference in the FMM settlement, and the key driver within the CISA proposal example is that change from looking at the real-time bid to looking at the day-ahead LMP. Since
Yeah,
here,
but in this example, oh, sorry, I was going to say, because if there's an SLC constraint that is forcing the battery to discharge more than the day-ahead schedule, the only type of constraint would be one of the ancillary service constraints, right? And there's already no BCR for that. So I guess I'm not understanding how this example leads to bid cost recovery.
Oh, I understand. Like, why would it be too full and then you would get BCR? No, that's kind of the question.
Yeah, like what exactly is leading to BCR? So I can understand that there's some kind of state of charge constraint at play, but in this example, if the day-ahead schedule is fulfilled, it's being forced to discharge higher than its bid price. The only state of charge constraint that could force it to discharge higher than its bid would be an ancillary service constraint, and there's already no BCR for that. So I guess I just don't understand how this example is relevant.
Yeah. Well, the key, kind of thing we wanted to underscore here is the need for additional logic in CISA's proposal, since this could occur. It's not really just the ASSOC trigger that could make it so that an asset might need to be, less full. It could also be a biddable parameter that is changing how the asset is optimized. Yeah, I don't know. Amelia, do you want to add anything here?
No, I just say we pose this as an example in which a state of charge was forcing the resource to discharge. We didn't put as much thought into exactly what that potential state of charge constraint would be, and we can take that as a follow-up. The point is that there is a constraint, and maybe we will get later in the presentation to Vistra's, but maybe this is a bid parameter or something that was input in between the day and the real-time market, which forced the change, for example. And in this case, it is forcing that resource to discharge more than it was originally scheduled, and to do so uneconomically. And that's what's leading to the bid cost recovery.
I see a couple other hands raised. Maybe we can get to those, and then we'll keep going on with the other alternatives.
Hi, this is Callie Wells with WPTF. Can you hear me okay? I had to switch audios. Okay, great. I just have a very basic question, just so I can make sure I really understand what you guys are proposing. And I don't know if this is applicable to CISA's proposal. So I'll first ask it with kind of the CAISA's original proposal. The trigger for which you guys would use that would then classify energy as non-optimal for the BCR calculation, is it when the SOC is either at the min or max and that resource has a day ahead schedule it can no longer support, or is it just when the SOC is at the min or max?
Yeah, I'll go back to that language because I think it's useful to show everyone. Yeah. So if the storage resource at the start of the binding interval has an SOC that is equal to its minimum or maximum value, then this would trigger. So it's not necessary that you would have a day ahead schedule or a specific award. It just means that if this triggers and you have a schedule or award, then there will be no BCR. If this happens and you didn't have a schedule or award, then there was not going to be a buyback or sellback either way. So it's only material when you have an award or schedule.
You mean when your real time, when your RTD energy schedule is not zero?
When your RTD energy schedule is not zero, no, I mean, this will only be material in terms of the buyback or sellback when you do have a day ahead schedule or award. But
right.
The logic would be looking at this in every binding interval.
Okay, yeah, I'm wondering if maybe I inappropriately assumed that it was kind of the both conditions, because I thought this whole concern was the buying and selling back of a day ahead schedule. Maybe that's worth exploring. I'll give it some more thought as well, but if the intervals in which you classify energy as non-optimal for BCR calculations meets both of those criteria, the SOCs at min or max, and that resource has a day ahead schedule it cannot support. I'll think through that a little bit more, and maybe I'd ask if you guys would think through that a little bit more, because I always assumed that was the case because of kind of the underlying concern that you guys have expressed here, that it's related to the buy and sell back of a day ahead schedule. But okay, I appreciate that clarification. Thank you.
And Kelly, can I add something for your consideration?
Yeah,
Here
of course.
is that when you look at the BCR calculation, it's really a comparison of typically the bid cost with the revenue that's coming in. And part of the tie-in with having a day ahead schedule that you're not meeting is that the incremental dispatch in the real time is then the difference between that day ahead schedule and the real time schedule.
Yes, which is
So
why
bid cost recovery in many cases is what's making resources then compensating them for the cost of not being able to meet those day ahead schedules. So there is that, if there is no such cost in the first place, then there wouldn't be any loss to that resource to be made whole with BCR.
Right, but I think maybe some of the concerns that you're raising about the alternative proposal might not be an issue if that's the case. I'll give it some more thought. I appreciate the clarification. But yeah, because I had always assumed it was kind of both of those conditions are met. But thank you.
I would imagine so that the second part of those two conditions are implicit in the fact that there would be a buyback or a sellback, no? That can only occur when there is a day ahead schedule. So that's part of it as well.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, I don't mean to belabor this, but kind of what kind of got me starting to go down that path was one of your concerns with the WEAM resources, right? They don't have a day ahead schedule. So is that a concern that needs to be thought through if there is no day ahead schedule, unless BCR looks at their base schedules, which honestly don't know if it does or does not. Anyways, I'll keep giving it some thought.
I believe
Thank you.
that it, for WEIM, it does look at their base schedule.
Oh, interesting. And I'd be curious as to what cost would be associated with that. Okay, anyways, thank you.
Maybe we can go with Don.
Hi, Don Trethewey from CISA. So one sort of general comment, the intent of what CISA put out there was to really address instances where there were inflated BCR. So putting out an example that says, look, the CISA proposal results in higher BCR payments. We would never put that out as an approach. And we did recognize that there would be the need for some additional logic. In fact, I had conversations with people at CAISO about that. I think what we need to better understand is, look, until CAISO can assure stakeholders that the market power mitigation approach, or the fact that you can't submit you can't do additional bids, we need that additional functionality before we can go after the full BCR exposure to real time that you're trying to go after. And so that's going to take far longer. And, we heard you when you expressed concerns about the inflated BCR, and that could be problematic. And that's what we're trying to address here. And I think if we think creatively and try to actually make the proposal work versus taking a literal approach to one example, that we can see that the full intent of the approach is by not using the real-time bid price, that in both instances where there's a forced buyback and a forced sellback, we should be able to unwind the inflated BCR payments so that those don't occur, which then will give us time to actually focus on coming up with a real solution across a full holistic solution about what BCR should mean for storage, what market design enhancements does CAISO need to actually start moving on so that we can actually fully expose these storage resources to real-time price. And I think, there's things like you could take the max of the real-time price or the day-ahead price, only in intervals when the SOC is binding. But I do also think that Callie brought up it was an interesting discussion where I am a little concerned now that when the SOC is binding prior to the start of the interval, that may be a little odd, that we need to sort of think through. But again, the intent here is to see if we can come up with a solution. And this is what I said in my comments last call. Let's try to separate the inflated BCR from exposure to real-time prices. I think we can all agree that we shouldn't have inflated BCR. And the examples that CISA put out showed no one can argue that it's not inappropriate for there to be a higher settlement when a resource doesn't deliver its full day ahead schedule. Then let's get that fixed and out. And then we can actually have a more deliberative discussion on what we need to do going forward.
Yeah, thanks for that, Don. The purpose of the conversation really is to put on our creative hats and think about how this solution might be able to be implemented. So it is important for us to discuss the potential need for additional logic to what was put forth in comments and talk about it publicly so that folks can give us their feedback and ideas. What we're seeing here is that we might need to think a bit more about this instance, for example. Like what happens here? Do we think that additional BCR relative to the status quo is desirable? If not, because as you say, I believe it's not aligned with the spirit of the proposal, then what kind of logic could we put forth? I hear you saying we could look at the max. That's viable too. That would be useful to note here in the conversation, in comments. So we welcome that. Yeah. I see a question in the chat that says, please clarify whether we are talking about inflated VCR payments or simply unwarranted VCR payments. In other, no VCR payments if it is unwarranted. Okay, I think this kind of relates to what Don was just discussing. Inflated or disproportionate or outsized VCR payments, we're generally using that to refer to what in the beginning we noted as concern to the ability of storage resources to bid strategically so as to get higher VCR and market revenues combined than if they were to meet their schedules. Unwarranted VCR, I think we've been using as something that refers to both the concerns we highlighted at the beginning of the call, not just that they might be unduly large payments, but also that they might be unwarranted relative to the treatment of other resources in the VCR construct. So I think that is the difference in how we're using those terms throughout the conversation. And thanks for the question. I see another hand from Joshua.
Yes, thank you, Javier. Sergio, sorry. Josh Reynolds, CES. I want to follow up a little bit on one of the points that Callie was getting at. In the language that you showed, it seems like you'd be triggering this loss of VCR for any buyback. Have we considered how that would handle situations where the unit has to buy back FMM positions, not day-ahead positions, due to a lack of state of charge? And this sort of goes into some of the comments that were made both last time and today by Don, where we get into that period of time, that 135 minutes, where you can't do anything, and the unit could be mitigated such that it's not economic and dispatched before it was supposed to meet its FMM schedule, which would have been perhaps economic, but it's dispatched at an earlier time. How would that work out? Have you thought about that?
So we'll talk about mitigation in some other slides. So I'd like to reserve that for that section.
Most certainly. Most certainly. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Well, I don't see any new hands, but Don and Joshua, you still have yours up, just so you know. Okay. Oh, is that a new hand, Don? Or okay, it's an old hand. Well, just as a quick, closer, let's say, to this discussion we've had on what we're dubbing here the CISA alternative proposal or the CISA proposal. We see some merits to the idea in regards to mitigating the magnitude of PCR payments in general and eliminating the influence of real-time bids on the calculation, but there are outstanding questions, and I'll quickly enumerate them again so that internally we can think about them moving forward and you all can consider them for your comments. Key questions are, what do we do with storage resources outside of the ISO's footprint? What value to use then? What are kind of the trade-offs with the use of the day-ahead P-node LMP, which could be used, but it's not necessarily reflective of the offers of those assets, just of how though that entity relates relative to the ISO's BAA. Second question is this just for a subset of intervals or for all intervals? If it's just for a subset of intervals, then we're not really eliminating the influence of bids in all other intervals, meaning that we could still get inflated, outsized VCR payments in other intervals. And then how do we treat incremental dispatch in real time, particularly when the day-ahead LMP is greater than the real-time LMP? what type of additional logic should we add? I've heard in this conversation, maybe you look at the maximum of different differences. That could be a way, but there might be others. Again, this is not to overly simplify or take literally any proposal. We're looking at the proposal as it was submitted and asking more questions to see how we can collaboratively develop it in a manner that is implementable. Okay, so now I'll talk about another interim solution that was put forward by stakeholders. This one is focused on instances of BCR that are resultant from direct scheduling coordinator action. So in their comments, Vistra put forth two proposals, one of them interim, and another, as my understanding was that other one wasn't interim. So the first one that was interim is the one that is very similar to the CISA proposal. The only difference is that it uses the DEB as opposed to the day-ahead LMP. The second proposal, which from reading the comments doesn't seem that it's part of that interim package, would be to classify energy associated with instructed imbalance energy as non-optimal in the intervals where the SC has taken any number of actions included here. This would effectively make that energy ineligible for BCR. It would exclude it from the BCR calculations. So Vistra's proposal would look at when the SC took any of these actions, and I'll read them quickly to give you an idea. Outage cards that reduces the resource Pmax, Pmin, maximum continuous stored energy or minimum continuous stored energy, or bit parameters that reduce the resource's maximum or minimum continuous stored energy. So these are the kind of situations that could also get us to an outcome like that example, that second example we saw in with CISA's proposal. So for example, yeah, like an asset submits a bit parameter that effectively reduces its maximum continuous stored energy. That makes it so that the optimization dispatches the asset incrementally, and because of that, we could get some form of BCR in that example that we went through prior. The logic behind Vistra's proposal is, there's been debate throughout this initiative in the different meetings we've had about looking at the instances that are resultant directly from SE action as opposed to ones that may be the result of the ISO's tools or optimizations. So here, there would be a very clean-cut separation of SE action and making the energy associated with that action ineligible for VCR. Importantly, this solution by itself, not to say that is what Vistra put forth, that it should be applied by itself, but I want to underscore it for everyone, that this solution by itself would not eliminate the ability of resources to bid strategically in a way to maximize their VCR payment. So this solution but by definition, should be considered as additive, to anything else that we have discussed, not as an alternative by itself. That's something important. It could be additive to what we just discussed of the CISA proposal. It could be additive to the Vistra flavor of that proposal, which would use the DEB, or it could be additive to the proposed solution that we've discussed before. But by itself, it wouldn't get us to a point where either concern 1 or 2 are alleviated. Now, there are still questions also as to how we could implement this proposal. Perhaps the most obvious question is what parameters, what intervals should be included from the effect of the outage or bit parameters? From reading the comments submitted by Vistra, it seems that their intent would be to focus on the intervals where those outages or bit parameters were submitted and in effect. But it's important to bear in mind that the market solution too will be impacted by any of these submissions. So should we just look at those intervals where they were submitted, or should some intervals prior be included? This is important to think about because, for example, today, when an asset uses the end-of-hour state of charge biddable parameter, the market will solve in a manner that will get the resource to that desired target state of charge. And that could mean that the resource would see what would prima facie seem uneconomic dispatch. But it's really to honor that parameter, right? To make sure that it meets that end-of-hour SOC. So, in this context of the end-of-hour state of charge parameter, already the hour preceding that operating hour is excluded from or ineligible from RTM bit cost shortfalls. Should something similar to this be considered for a solution like the one put forth by Vistra? This is something that I think is quite important, both in the discussion of assets can't reassess their or resubmit their bids for a number of intervals, but also because generally the market solution obviously takes into account all of these parameters moving forward, right? So it'll be important to see how these interact. So this would have been the stopping point for all of the alternative proposals, but there were several questions on the prior one. I'll pause here to see if there's any questions or comments before moving on to the next section. Dawn.
Don Trethewey with CISA. I hate to do this, but can we go all the way back to slide 8? I want to get a better understanding of what the CAISO proposal is. And Callie hit on this, but as well. But so if I'm in RTD, I assume it's by settlement, 5-minute settlement intervals. So the binding interval is the first 5-minute interval in the RTD run. Are you saying that my SOC needs to be at its max or minimum at the start of that 5-minute interval, and then that 5-minute interval is not eligible for BCR?
The energy associated with that 5-minute interval would be excluded from the BCR calculation, yes.
And so, and would you treat FMM differently, or are you doing everything by the final RTD settlement?
Everything is by the RTD in the 5-minute intervals.
Okay, so you need to, so for your rule to apply, that basically it has to be at full charge. If it's at full charge, then it's not gonna be eligible for BCR, and if it's full discharge, it's not going to be eligible for BCR.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's kind of the part where I was saying that the need for a day-ahead schedule is implicit in it, because if you had a day-ahead schedule, then there would have been a buyback. No, like that energy, that's where you start having either the buyback or the sellback. But because of this trigger, then if there had been a buyback or not, then you wouldn't get that energy wouldn't be counted towards the VCR, so you wouldn't get that buyback or sellback.
Is there a logic why you picked the start of the interval and not the end of the 5-minute interval, or is it just for simplicity, or is there some other underlying logic you're trying to go after by saying it's the start?
Well, if we were to have picked the end of the interval, like things can happen during the interval that change the state of charge. That's why we're looking at the beginning of the interval. Yeah.
But and again, it's the 5-minute RTD interval, the binding 5-minute RTD interval that's triggering this whole thing.
Yeah, it is as we've presented it in the paper and in prior conversations. That's really the logic.
All right, thanks for that clarification.
Okay, I don't see any other hands or anything else. Grant, I just saw your hand.
On this, or maybe it's in your paper, but is there
Grant, could you start over, because I can barely hear you now and I couldn't hear the beginning.
Okay, yeah, apologize if you've already said this because I joined this late, my apologies, but is there anything in your proposal that would cover if we're mitigated and so we don't have the energy to meet a day ahead schedule?
So we will talk about mitigation in the next section, and I'll
Perfect.
cover that as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Well, seeing no other hands, I'll keep moving forward to the next part, which has to do with mitigation. So, in prior conversations, several stakeholders noted that there could still be some instances that warrants VCR. A key example we heard from stakeholders was what happens when there was mitigation in prior intervals, and because of that, that led to incremental dispatch, and because of that, there wasn't sufficient state of charge to support a day-ahead schedule. So this conversation, we also had this conversation at the Market Surveillance Committee meeting, and there the MSC noted that we don't know how material this impact would be, but that some solution to make the proposed solution work, if mitigation happened, would be to do something similar to the hold exceptional dispatch, where we would use a counterfactual to calculate the difference in revenues and then be able to make the resource whole. So that was an idea that was floated then. Since then, we've noted both there and in the other meetings we've had in this initiative that we do some analysis to understand the prevalence of the issue and how it, if it merits a specific exception or caveat. So I will present some of the initial analysis we've done on this matter. And I would also note that, some questions remain. So this is not fully conclusive, but I want to give a good picture of where we're at and what we are seeing. Okay, so first I want to show this graph. All of these graphs are covering the same time period, July of last year to June of this year. We think that this is valuable as opposed to going further back, because if we were to go further back, there were fewer storage resources, so it's not as representative of the conditions we have now. So just by looking at this, you can tell that this data, is showing the frequency of resources that experience mitigation in at least one interval. So when you look at this, it doesn't mean that these resources were mitigated all the time. It also doesn't mean that they were only mitigated one interval, right? We're just, if a resource experienced mitigation across 5 minutes, it's counted in this graph. If it experienced this through several hours, it's also counted in this graph equally, right? We're only looking at what share of resources experienced at least one interval of mitigation. So what you can see here is that, mitigation is, it affects over this period between 1 and 3 resources per each 10 resources, 10 to 30%. Now, this, may sound, as I said, a bit alarming, but it doesn't give us an indication of how frequently they were mitigated. Now, if we look at the next slide, again, between 40 and 30 and 50% of the time, there was mitigation on a storage resource. This once more means that in a given period, a resource was mitigated. It doesn't tell us either, how long they were mitigated, and it also doesn't tell us, the size of the resource that was mitigated. So just because mitigation was relatively frequent, it doesn't immediately mean that it was very prevalent across all resources, or that it was across the majority of the time for a given resource. Since once more, we're just looking at if mitigation happened in at least one interval. So I really want to qualify this, like how to read this graphs, so that folks don't leave here with the wrong impression. These resources, if a given resource was mitigated for one interval, or if 100 resources were mitigated for one interval, that is captured here equally, because we're only looking at what percentage of intervals had at least one resource mitigated. Now, I do want to note that based on this analysis, as well as other analysis that has been put forth by DMM, it does appear that incremental dispatch resulting from mitigation is very low. Basically, it is not common for resources to be mitigated and for that mitigation to result in incremental dispatch. For this, I would, recommend that you go look at DMM's recent report on this as well, on storage, since it captures that quite well. Now, this final graph on mitigation shows us that about 41% of the VCR that was paid to mitigated resources in the period that we're looking at. Once more, this does not mean that these resources were, mitigated all of that period. It is really just looking at of resources that experience mitigation, how much of the VCR was paid to those resources. So this is important to look at the graphs in that light. So what do we think so far about mitigation? So right now, we don't think that we have, conclusive data yet on the prevalence and impact of the issue. What we've seen is that while, mitigation is, something that different resources have experienced in different number of intervals. It does not generally have the effect of driving incremental dispatch based on this and other analysis. So it has not resulted in very often in the situation described by the concerns of some stakeholders to this initiative, that it would be common for mitigation to trigger incremental dispatch that would then affect resources' ability to support schedules or awards. However, we do think that considering whether there should be an exception or caveat for mitigation is generally dependent on the solution we'll pursue. If the proposed solution is pursued, a specific exemption for mitigation may be warranted, even though, as I said, we do not have right now analysis that suggests that this has resulted in significant incremental dispatch. I just said that it may be warranted just because of how the proposed solution is formulated. Now, if a solution akin to the CISA proposal is pursued, we might not need a modification to cover the instances of mitigation, because CISA solution does not eliminate or exclude certain energy from BCR. It only modifies the calculation of BCR. So CISA solution, just as at the beginning of the call I mentioned that the proposed solution is about the categorization of energy, but CISA solution is really about the price that is used in BCR. It's not changing the what is included in BCR, it's just changing the price on it, right? The proposed solution does change what is included in BCR. So since CISA's proposal is only looking at a change in the price of it, in what is considered in the calculation for the prices of it, it might not need a specific modification for mitigation. However, if we pursue something akin to CISA's proposal and further discussion on a holistic revision of the storage uplift construct is needed, then further discussion of mitigation will be necessary. So I will pause here to see if there's any questions. I see one hand from Joshua.
Yes, good afternoon again, Josh Arnold, CES. Regarding the analysis you guys have done, first off on the mitigations, are you looking only at instances where the unit was mitigated for supply bids, where the unit would discharge, or are you also looking at situations where the unit is bidding to charge and act as a load, and where those intervals are being mitigated as well? Because as we pointed out in our comments, that's actually a fairly frequent occurrence on some of these resources, and that's preventing them from getting to the state of charge that is necessary to meet those day-ahead obligations. And we're still very concerned about that use of mitigation. It just simply doesn't make sense to us why why DMM or the market power mitigation process would lower the price that a unit is willing to pay to charge the plant.
Yeah, this approach this analysis, the graphs we've shared, looked at all instances of mitigation. Now, as I mentioned before, the different graphs are very focused on what is here in the y-axis. No, so here we're looking at the percentage of mitigated storage resources that were mitigated in one or several intervals in any way that mitigation can happen. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
So again, I guess the question then is, in the instances where a unit is not able to charge because of mitigation, how do you intend to address that? Because that seems to fall into a very different category than the ones we've been talking to, where there's incremental dispatch.
Well, here we're not we're not having this conversation just for the purpose of how we will address it. The first part of the discussion is it material for it to be like, is this concern, is this a material impact today, how mitigation runs and how frequent it is? So we're putting forth this data to foster that discussion, no? Then second, we know that different proposals might need to address this or not. If we go through one of the proposals of using the day-ahead LMP or using the DEV, the CISA or VISTRA proposals, it would seem that we don't need to have a specific consideration of how mitigation interplays, because VCR would still exist. It's only changing the price of it. If we were to pursue the proposed solution, then we might have to have something to address this, something akin perhaps to this whole exceptional dispatch logic that already exists, but that will depend on just how material and prevalent this issue is.
Okay, then I guess one last question.
So I'm not trying to limit the solution set here. I'm trying to offer information for us to continue talking about the solution. Yeah.
Absolutely reasonable. Thank you for that. So one further question then. In the evaluation, have you, I understand that you're looking at any number of mitigation intervals on a resource in a given day as one instance. Have you guys done any evaluation on either the total number of megawatts that were mitigated, especially in terms of incremental or non-dispatched energy? And have you also looked at the total number of intervals overall that were mitigated, not just simply as one count, but the total sum all intervals where mitigation occurred, to get a sense for how prevalent it is occurring within the market structure?
Yeah, so to find an accurate answer to those questions, it will require a bit more analysis, because it would need to identify the timing of mitigation as well.
Okay.
So this is, let's say, an initial analysis pass, but we'll, to the degree that we think, you know, it's that it's warranted to perform more analysis, we can look into that. So it would be great if you can, you know, reflect that in your comments as well, Joshua.
Okay. And then the only other thing I want to bring up is in regards to the previous BCR stuff, I would like to bring forward one last scenario that I think needs to be highlighted and excluded from BCR, and made sure is included in BCR, and that's price correction. We've been talking about causes of BCR. I just want to make sure that something price correction where a marginal unit is no longer economic is still, of course, recognized and included in BCR, just as a matter of policy.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. We can add that to kind of this list of instances that stakeholders have raised. And, you know, if others have thoughts on that, do let us know through your comments as well. I think next we have Ellen and then Grant.
Hi, Sergio. Thank you. Thanks for the data too. I know that in stakeholder comments, a lot of stakeholders have asked for more data, including the MSC also made a request for more data on how much of the BCR is really unwarranted. I think with a thought that mitigation may make some of the BCR warranted instead of unwarranted. And so this may be kind of a naive question, but I wonder how difficult it is to go backwards and do a analysis of, given mitigation, would some of the unwarranted BCR be reclassified as warranted? And then under your proposal, would you sort of falsely withhold BCR when given mitigation it would have been warranted? Is that a particularly complex analysis or would it be possible to, sort of make the analysis that you provided more sophisticated to help answer the question? Because I think that's really the question that people have been interested in seeing some data about.
Yeah, well, I think from my understanding, that would be a very significant lift analytically, particularly because, as we've said prior, the market solves by looking at many factors, many variables, many parameters. And all of that market solution then later is fed into the settlements process that gives us, ultimately the BCR number. But going back and identifying what is the driver behind each decision that accrued BCR over the day is very complex, right? It's not just, we don't have a flag that tells us, hey, this BCR in this interval happened because of this reason or this other factor. So when we are talking about this issue, that's why we are representing it in the broadest and clearest terms. BCR is happening because storage resources don't have the state of charge to support their awards or schedules. There are many drivers behind why they wouldn't have that state of charge. But the issue is that the issue as we've defined it previously is that the market is still making them whole despite that fact of being unavailable and being able to submit bids that could result in higher BCR, right? But it would be very burdensome analytically to be able to discern what is the driver behind each payment, or really it would be behind each interval where BCR was accrued. Yeah.
So then that also tells me that if you were to implement the CAISO's proposal, you would similarly not be able to tell after the fact how much BCR was withheld during instances where it may have been warranted due to mitigation.
Well, but if we were to continue with the proposed solution, we might include, that's precisely why we think that, and I'll go back to that slide, that if we continued with the proposed solution, if that is pursued, a specific exception for mitigation may be warranted, right?
I see, yeah.
That's really why, because in that solution, we are changing what gets BCR and what doesn't. In the CISA proposal, we're just changing the price of it, no? So in the proposed solution, we might need to continue to have this conversation of, is BCR really material? Do we really need an exception because it happens so often and it affects BCR so frequently? How do we develop that exception? In other solutions, we might not need to have that discussion. It's really a trade-off, right? But
yeah,
either require us to have a better understanding of how extensive and pervasive this issue is relative to are these resources that are being mitigated are being dispatched incrementally. If they are being dispatched incrementally, then I think the question of whether mitigation can lead to these resources being unable to support their awards and schedules, then that question holds water if it happens frequently and it results in incremental dispatch. If it does not result in incremental dispatch, the idea that that is a driver of future unavailability might not hold water, right? Because even if you're mitigated, you're not being dispatched incrementally. Therefore, that's not affecting your ability to support awards and schedules in future intervals. So that's why we want to understand how pervasive this issue is.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that helps. I mean, my takeaway is I agree that if you stay with the CAISO proposal, that consideration of exemptions under mitigation is important, and it may be cause for considering further CESA's proposal if you can figure out a way to do it where you're satisfied that it's comprehensive. But the other question that's left in my mind, you don't have to answer this now, but it seems like a mitigation in a prior interval could affect this whole equation too. So would it just be interval by interval, or would it be mitigation in any interval across a day then causes that trigger to not have the BCR withheld? How do you decide that? So that's something I'd be interested in reading more about in your next proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. I would just note that I don't think I fully agree with how you summarized that in the end. So let me do my summary to see how that might work. We don't have yet conclusive data to show the prevalence of mitigation and its impact on incremental dispatch. But what we have suggests that mitigation does not result in significant incremental dispatch. If that is the case, if it doesn't result in significant incremental dispatch, having a specific exception for mitigation might not be necessary either way. If it does result in incremental dispatch, then maybe we need a specific exception for mitigation under the proposed solution. But in any case, the CESA proposal might not need an exception for mitigation because it's not dealing with that. It's just changing the price of BCR. So hopefully that is clearer, and I can reword this right for that.
Yeah, thank you for that. I understand the distinction. I guess what I'm just not very clear on is whether mitigation in a prior interval could affect an SC's ability to keep their day ahead schedule or to respond in an economically efficient way in subsequent intervals. And I haven't really thought about it that much, but if you can help us with that when you come out with your next proposal, that would be at least good for me.
Yeah, and that's what I'm referring to as incremental dispatch. Like if you're mitigated and the middle of the day, well, the middle of the day is not a good example. If you're mitigated at a given interval, because of that mitigation, there's incremental dispatch, meaning the resource is dispatched in that interval that was mitigated. And because of that dispatch, later in the day, the resource does not have enough state of charge to support its award. We're not seeing that is as prevalent based on this initial analysis and the analysis put forth by the MM as well, which I believe is now in the chat. Brenda put it as well. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll certainly think about it some more. Thanks for the conversation. Appreciate it.
Of course. Okay, now we have Grant.
Yeah, thank you, Sergio. Appreciate that the CAISO is under their proposal is saying that this may an exception for mitigation may be warranted. I would just comment that what is material for the CAISO is not only may not be material, same thing as material for a resource. And, it just takes one bad day and, that's material for a resource. If I am mitigated and I can no longer, discharge for my day ahead award and prices go up through the roof, right? That's a big deal for a resource. So keep that in mind. And then the second thing is that there is a subset of resources that are making up most of your mitigation, and those are local resources. So it's not fair to say overall, look, there's only 30% of the resources are being mitigated. I think if you look at it and say, of those that are being mitigated, it's probably a very high percentage are local resources, and they're probably getting mitigated a lot. So, you're kind of mixing it all in at a system level when the problem is much higher at a local area. And I don't know that any more analysis needs to be done other than, I think the consideration, if you go forward with the proposed solution, is let's find a way to make sure that, we're not hitting resources really hard because of that one bad day. And that's really all it takes. And in my mind, frequency only has to be one to make a bad day. That's all I got. Thank you.
Yeah. No, thanks for that, Grant. We understand that there might be differences as well among resources. And this is, part of an ongoing effort to address the asks for more data as well. And, just as we are trying to respond to the requests from stakeholders to give more data, I think it's also important to think about kind of the balancing that is necessary when developing these solutions too, of thinking about what is present and material risk that we need to address immediately, or one where we need more information to define how to address it. And I think this one is a little bit of the latter, where we're getting more information to see if and how to address it, and we're trying to have that discussion as well. But I appreciate your feedback, Grant. I don't see other hands up, but I did see some written questions, so I'll get to those quickly. It says that this analysis includes times when mitigation prevented charging to meet the day-ahead schedule. This analysis includes all instances of mitigation. Then, can you quantify what you mean by low incremental dispatch? So here, what we're trying to refer to is instances in which mitigation resulted in incremental dispatch of the asset, meaning that because of the lower bid that was mitigated, that asset had higher dispatch than without the mitigation bid. What we see is that that is not very prevalent, and the best resource to take a look at that is from the materials shared by Brenda in the chat. And then another question is, can we get better data than slides 29 and 30? It is impossible to tell from these two slides how extensive mitigation is and how material this issue is. Yeah, that's kind of what we're trying to convey as well, David, that by this initial analysis in those slides, it's not conclusive to show how extensive the issue is or how material it is, but from this and the analysis that we've referred to from the MM's work, it seems that mitigation does not result in significant incremental dispatch, meaning that it might not significantly contribute to the inability of resources to meet their awards and schedules later on. So we can try, to get more and better data, but as you underscore with the one we have now, it's not clean cut that this is incredibly urgent or that it's not material, right? We're still better understanding this. So with that, I want to underscore for this piece that, we would definitely welcome your thoughts on how to consider this issue in the different alternatives that have been put forth, as well as in the proposed solution, since we'll keep development of the proposed solution and these alternatives and other proposals that you might think merit consideration as we continue this process. I see Ellen's hand is still up. I don't know if that is a new hand or an old one. Probably an old one. Well, with that, I'll pause to, now we would have our scheduled time for additional open stakeholder conversation. So I'll pause for a little bit to see if there's any other questions or comments. And if not, I'll pass it on to my colleague, Brenda Marx. Michael.
Hi, Sergio. Michael Volpe from PG&E. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I was just wondering if you could speak to the difference between real-time bid cost recovery and RUC bid cost recovery. I was just going over the DMM's 2023 annual report, market issues and performance. And they noticed, they point out that a lot of the increase in BCR is through the RUC process, but in this initiative we keep talking about the real-time BCR. So just hoping you can clarify that.
Yeah. So there are three bid cost recovery calculations that happen. One for day ahead for the integrated forward market, then one for RUC, and then one for real time. The IFM calculation is its own thing, and then RUC and real time are together. They're netted together. So an increase in real time would be, in the same combined netting with RUC. Today, storage resources, they don't participate in RUC, so really the increase there is really relative to the real-time part of that netting.
Just a follow-up on that, if you are reading the DMM report, there is a section on bid cost recovery which breaks down payments in 2023 by fuel and technology type, which might be interesting.
Yeah, thank you both for clarifying that. I mean, the real, crux of my question was related to the change that was made in June of 2023 to use a different regression, mosaic quantile regression to calculate the RUC adjustments, was attributed to these higher BCR numbers. And I was wondering, did that affect the storage BCR? I mean, if it's lumped into the real time, then I guess you wouldn't see the difference between RUC and real time. But if storage isn't participating in RUC, then I'm just trying to understand this, if it's related.
Sorry, I didn't fully follow that question. Could you rephrase it? I'm sorry.
So Sergio, let me
yes.
take a shot at that. I think what DMM is pointing out in their report is that there is a link between a change in the operator adjustments to RUC and some of the RUC costs associated with procuring that RUC demand, some of which show up in the bid cost recovery associated with RUC. That is not directly related with the storage BCR issue that we're discussing here today, in part because, as Sergio pointed out, storage resources aren't participating in RUC. So those are two independent issues.
Okay, so it's just a coincidence that the increase in numbers seem to be around the same time, starting in July 2023.
The RUC BCR and the storage BCR are separate, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. I see Alva's hand.
Oh, Sergio. I'm I'm tempted to sort of duplicate what Ellen did, but and see what you think of my summarizing where this presentation seems to have gone, which is that the and get your comment, is that it seems that the complications of the original approach, particularly with respect to these sorts of scenarios of mitigation, would lean CAISO towards something that looks a lot more like either the CISA or the VISTRA approach, which don't require consideration of those exceptional circumstances. And I think I'd agree with that, but I'm curious as to whether CAISO is seriously thinking about moving in that direction, because I think it is a good one in terms of efficiency and trying to move on to the pressing issues of the next year.
Yeah, I would say that we are considering all of these alternatives in, seriously, the proposed solution and the solutions put forth by stakeholders as well. In order for any of them to be pursued and implemented, we need to have, clarity around the specifics of the solutions. There's definitely outstanding questions for all of them. There's significant questions for the CISA proposal, as we've shown here. There's also questions on our proposed solution too. I think specifically for mitigation, the CISA proposal might not need any kind of change or adjustment for the mitigation issue, whereas the proposed solution might merit some exception or caveat if we find that the issue of mitigation is material enough and has resulted in incremental dispatch that actually limits the ability of these resources to meet their awards and schedules. So yes, we are considering all of these in good faith and seriously. I wouldn't say that any of them are necessarily easier or harder. They all have questions that we need to collaboratively resolve, and they all need more development and more work. So that's really why we wanted to modify the schedule so that, we can work with you and you can work with us. That's a plural, you all stakeholders can work with us to continue developing these ideas, and then we can find which one is, truly the one that is perhaps best suited to address these concerns.
Agreed. And I do think in some ways the VISTRA proposal was similar to one that PG&E had originally suggested of using the DEB in these cases. And I think that one does have some more simplicity even than the CISA one, in that there's not a concern about the day ahead real-time prices in the settlements process. So perhaps that's a direction to be looking at. I think one of the things, Michael was sort of suggesting an empirical look at this. I think one of the problems with the way that you've and I think as part of the motivation is that CAISO presented essentially an exploit in order to make the urgency of this compelling to participants. You had to present essentially the possibility of an exploit, and that makes it pressing to do something about that exploit. And I think that's where Don has come forward and said that has to be dealt with. You can't allow people to modify their bids knowing that they're going to receive BCR due to that. But the general context is that of resources trying to bid their, can resources bid their opportunity costs, which includes their uncertainties about what the CAISO market is going to do. And if it, in my view, if they can, then the burden should be as much as possible on the market participants. And I've come around to that position after listening to your arguments. I think the burden for bidding your correct opportunity costs should be on the market participants. And then the question is, does CAISO prevent participants from bidding their opportunity costs by various changes of the bids mentioned by Don and Josh? And I think given that that's a possibility, we're better off not trying to deal thoroughly with that issue at this point. So that's just my view on what you presented. An excellent presentation, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you all. And we will greatly appreciate if you have more thoughts on kind of the trade-offs and relative advantages of going with the DEB instead of the day-ahead LMP. Please tell us that in your comments. That will be very useful too, because here, we wanted to talk a little bit more about the day-ahead LMP idea, because we've heard it and we're a little bit more familiar on how with the DEB it would work. But we wanted to underscore here some of the challenges that are specific to the day-ahead LMP so as to foster this conversation, right? But please, don't hesitate to let us know your thoughts in your comments. That will be very valuable. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, I saw Don have his hand up, but maybe it's gone. Oh, it's back.
Yeah, so this is Don Trethewey from CISA. So I'll just follow on a little bit to what Alva said. I think it's not just the mitigation that's an issue with the ability for scheduling coordinators of storage resources to be able to reflect their real-time conditions, but it's also the 75-minute window that Josh highlighted and we highlighted last time before. And that's why I think we need to bifurcate this into, I think we can all agree that instances where there is unjustified BCR or inflated BCR, that we want to just have a very simple settlement rule that lets you implement that as soon as possible, and then we can have a real long discussion. I don't think that you'd be able to develop the storage exceptional dispatch mitigation approach between now and November. And so, that's where I think that's why we proposed what we did, is something that was just a settlement rule to address the egregious instance where we can all agree that there shouldn't be BCR. And whether you use the DEB or you use the day-ahead price or use the higher of the real-time price, we just simply need to work through the math to figure out which approach gets you to that outcome. And then we can prioritize and focus on the important issues, which is improving the default energy bid for storage, allowing hybrid resources to bid above $1,000 and to have a DEB, to where we start the energy storage enhancements that we haven't started, and I don't even know when that's going to start. So I think I would just highly recommend that we focus on the narrow issue first, and then we spend the time to develop the right solution longer term. But I do agree we need to do something now.
Thank you for that, Don. And we will continue to definitely, we want to get something done by November, of course. I think to better understand which of these alternatives is the one we'll keep moving forward. We're really definitely counting on stakeholders to help us figure out the questions we posed here about the different alternative solutions, right? We heard that stakeholders were interested in, engaging and providing more robust feedback and having other alternatives be discussed and on the table. And that's why we've modified the schedule here. Now I think it's really the time to work together to figure out how this could be implemented, and that there's different alternatives and the proposed solution could be implemented, and those discussions will give us the certainty of what path to follow. So I appreciate that engagement. I only see one hand, and it's Alva's. I assume it's an old hand, but I'll give folks another 10, 15 seconds to see if anyone else wants to comment or ask a question before we move on to next steps with Brenda. Okay, I'm not seeing any, so I'll pass it on to you, Brenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio, and thank you, Amelia, for your support for this meeting. The next steps is that we have posted the presentation, and the comment template is going to be posted within the next hour. As well, that comment deadline is next Monday, August 26th. If you can go ahead and provide those comments. We do have a grace period of 24 hours if you do submit after that deadline. So just keep that in mind when you do submit comments. We do have a grace period, but we'll have to send you an extension for those comments to be submitted. But the better we get them in sooner, the more better we'll be able to review those comments for the next upcoming posting, which is the revised draft proposal on September 2nd. We'll be having a stakeholder meeting for the revised draft proposal on September 9th. There'll be a daily briefing going out next week providing that information. And then we do have those comments deadline on the 23rd of September. So we appreciate everyone's communication, and this schedule has been up to date on the initial webpage. We also provided out in the chat a few links for everyone to visit. For those who are on audio only, feel free to just visit the CAISO.com under Stakeholder Center and then click on Policy Initiatives and go to Storage, Bid Cost Recovery, and Default Energy Bids Enhancements for those links that I provided if you're on the audio only. If you do have any questions, feel free to send them over to ISO@CAISO.com. We are monitoring a lot of high volume emails for the next few weeks, so be patient with us if there is a question. But other than that, feel free to send them to my email, or you can send it to ISO@CAISO.com. The next is we just have an energy blog matter that has been posted about every 2 weeks. The latest news releases we have posted, one for Western Energy Market Governance Enhancements approved, as well as the other ones are related to transmission. We also have a few few events coming next month for September. The first one is the Resource Interconnection Standards Fair, and we will have an agenda already posted for that. And if you do want to register, go to CAISO.com, click on meeting events, and then you'll see the two events, for one for symposium and the other one for the Resource Interconnection Standards Fair. The new policy initiatives timeline that the Stakeholder Affairs team is working on every week is just updating that landing page where it details all initiatives within what timeline they are for the bird's eye view. If you do have any feedback or any recommendations, we are taking them as well. We're updating the timeline weekly, so if there's any questions, feel free to send them over at ISO@CAISO.com. And lastly, we do have a stakeholder symposium this year in October 29th and 30th. We would like for all you to join us for a welcome reception at the Kempton Sawyer in Sacramento on October 29th, and the symposium program, which is one day on October 30th. There's a lot of great sponsors who have signed up with us, and we're excited to start sending out their sponsorship packages, which will include, if you go on that link, And then also, if you wanted to learn more information on registering as an attendee, there's also that link for the eventnovi.com/2024 Stakeholder Symposium. But other than that, I will also be working with the symposium team for that. And if there's any questions, feel free to route them over to simporeg@kaizo.com. But other than that, we thank everyone for attending this call. We plan to expedite this recording so that therefore can be added to the webpage for those who weren't able to listen. As well, we'll have a comment template available by this afternoon. We're just working with a Kaizo team to make sure it gets approved and posted for today. And it'll be due on August 26th. And at this time, I'm seeing no questions in the chat. I will go ahead and let Yolande go ahead and close our call. And thanks so much for joining. And we look forward to seeing you at the next meeting. Thank you.
The conference is now over. You may now disconnect. Have a wonderful rest of your day.